The film begins with a certain cyclist running through the field. Looking around, he notices a white van pulling up right behind him. An older man gets out and tells him to come back to get his phone back. The cyclist is afraid of the man, so he takes the bike in his hands and runs in the opposite direction. He gets to the road where he pedals as hard as possible, but all of a sudden, a white van speeds toward and hits him. As the injured man tries to hide in a ditch, the elderly man named Ed calmly parks his car. After that, he steps out to hide his bike. Next, he puts on a protective suit, greets a passerby as if nothing happened, and starts pumping some substance. He then goes to find the terrified cyclist. The victim makes an attempt to apologize. It's not clear what he did to enrage Ed. The elderly man tells him it is too late to apologize and fills his mouth with the toxic substance. In the next scene, we meet a normal friendly family who plans to go to their father's parents for a few days. The father, Hans, is annoyed from the early morning because his wife, Diana, takes too long to pack. They generally conduct a fairly stressful relationship and argue about stupid things. Also in the car are their two small daughters, Rabine and Milo. The two parents love them very much, but the sisters constantly fight over every nonsense. Hans has to drive, talk to his wife and calm the girls down. His head is about to explode. Just then, the little girls start fighting over the iPad right in the car. Milo unbuckles her seatbelt and takes the device away from her younger sister. At that moment, Hans notices an Audi that wants to overtake him. Hans changes lanes and appears to let the car pass, but suddenly hits the gas pedal. Hans picks up more and more speed until, at a certain moment, the driver of the Audi suddenly changes lanes. Hans gets frightened and brakes abruptly, and because of this, Milo hits her head. The father unloads his anger on the girl and yells at her to put on her seatbelt. It would seem that it is time to calm down and stop speeding on the busy highway. Hans, on the other hand, does not want to be late for lunch. Soon after, he does exactly what he chastised Audi's owner for. He encounters a van driving by the traffic rules. He signals the van to move in front of the trucks so the accumulated flow can pass. The van driver does not pay attention, instead, slows down abruptly, and Hans manages to hit the brakes at the last second. They exchange glances at each other. Then Hans shows him a not very nice gesture. He presses the gas pedal and continues the journey. Sometime later, they inform Hans' parents that they will arrive in 30 minutes and stop at the gas station. But here's where it gets interesting. There the same van stops, and the whole family meets up with Ed, the old man you saw at the beginning of the movie. Ed explains to the children that when the father overtook him, the speed limit was 100 kilometers per hour, and if their father did not keep a safe distance, a big accident could have happened. Hans doesn't compromise as he hits the man in the chest. But his fists are not much different than a 10-year-old, and he keeps yelling that he can take care of himself. Ed remains strangely calm and advises Hans to apologize. Hans's ego won't let him, and he walks back to his family. Bad choice, Hans. Our protagonists set off on their journey again, but after a few minutes, Hans notices that the white van is on his tail. He starts to get agitated but doesn't say anything to his wife or children so as not to scare them. Diana and the girls talk to him, but he cannot stay focused because he keeps looking at Ed, who is following them. A few kilometers from the destination, Hans notices a red light ahead. Instead of stopping, he speeds past, and the girls are startled. Hans seems relieved, believing the white van has lost sight of them. Meanwhile, the white van stops at the intersection. But it is still too early to shout, "Victory!" Ed is still on their trail. In their car, the daughter notices that her father is constantly looking in the mirror. When she turns to check, she sees the white van, and panic kicks in. The van quickly catches up with them, and Diana is about to call the police. Hans has to prove that he is an alpha male and tells her to turn off her cell phone. He decides to pull over the car on the right side of the road and gets out. He approaches the van and asks why Ed is following them. Hans calmly tells him that an apology is all he needs. Ed criticizes him for what he has done previously while Hans argues only the police can judge his actions. As Hans is about to dial, Ed repeats that all he needs to do is to apologize and go back to his family. Hans refuses to do so, and soon after, Ed's eyes fill with anger. The man tries to take the phone from Hans and smashes it with the force of his hands. At that moment, Diana runs toward them and tries to help her husband. Both Hans and Diana fall to the ground, and inches from the woman's head, a car passes by. The wife desperately asks her husband to apologize to Ed. Hans is still hesitant, but when he sees his daughters crying, he relents and approaches Ed. He apologizes, but Ed tells him with anger on his face that it is now too late. The man rolls up the windows and gets out of the van. He pulls out the canister and starts pumping. Hans tries to return his cell phone, but Ed throws him on the ground. He then prepares to spray Hans with his toxic substance. Hans manages to get to his car, but before he leaves, Ed manages to spray it inside. However, the hose breaks, and the liquid spills onto Ed's leg. In the meantime, the family manages to drive away, but not for too long because everyone starts to suffocate. After a while, they get out of the car and watch as Ed gets into his van and starts approaching them. They start running through the trees and find a puddle where they wash away the substance. In the process, Ed approaches, and Diana jumps behind the wheel and they try to drive away. Suddenly the car begins to skid. As Ed gets out of the van and prepares another round, Hans gets out of the car and tries to push it. Diana attempts to get out of the mud, but the car door hits Hans. Fortunately, he does not lose consciousness. Ed approaches to spray his magic potion, but at the last moment, Hans manages to jump into the car and escape. Ed breaks their glass and then begins to chase them. Diana begins to drive recklessly through the city's neighborhoods. She risks killing many people and crashing the car. She rips off the muffler and enrages many parents. Soon after, Diana is about to run over two cyclists, and Hans manages to turn the steering wheel just in time. Nevertheless, they manage to get away from Ed while the predator stops and calmly washes his beloved van. With the help of Hans' phone, Ed discovers his parents' address. Meanwhile, the family stops at the police station and reports to them about the incident. They wash up in the bathroom, and the officers help them fix their car. Afterward, the family goes to Hans's parents' house, escorted by the police. Along the way, everyone becomes paranoid once they see some white vans. At one point, they see a van just like Ed's, and the girls start crying desperately. Fortunately, it is just a random stranger. At this moment, Ed arrives at Hans' mother's house. He says he has found her son's phone. The lady offers to take it so that the man does not have to wait until Hans arrives. Ed says it would be better if he delivered it himself since he is the one who found it. Ed then shows a chemical burn on his leg and asks for water. The lady takes him into the house and offers to help. Ed starts talking to her about her son's upbringing, insinuating that Hans is ill-mannered. When he starts talking to the old woman in a different tone, she tries to kick him out of the house. He immediately attacks her and covers her mouth. The lady manages to yell at her husband to block the door to the room, but Ed is just in time to open it. He goes inside and accuses them of raising such a child as Hans. A few minutes later, Hans and the police arrive at the house. Hans thinks he is safe and decides to let the police go to prevent his mother from learning what happened, since she has blood pressure problems. The family enters the house, and while the children go up to their grandparents, Diana is baking a cake. In the process, Hans brings the car into the yard when the sisters hear a cry for help and call their parents. When Hans goes upstairs, he is attacked by Ed, who manages to spray the substance on him. Hans flees to the street, followed by Ed. Meanwhile, Diana helps the elderly couple and frees them. Hans, now covered in blisters, is frightened and wants to return to the house, but his wife tells him to stop at the neighbors. Hans ignores and manages to climb to the second floor. His mother forces him to undress and showers him to wash off the poison residue. The police arrive, and while the sisters are sitting in the car, Ed arrives and tells them that they are innocent. A few months later, Hans recovered and is doing well. He drives the children to school, and on his way home, a white van appears behind him. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching. You should check these recaps.